So here we are back at our Linux machine running Metasploit. And if you remember, what we actually did is we ran an exploit, we ran a Windows, an SMB, and then a PSExec exploit. And that exploit utilizes the mechanism for sharing files, i.e. SMB. Now, of course, if you remember, if I do show options, what it requires is specifically a domain, a password, and a username, and then also a share, which in this case is admin $, which is a regular share on a Windows machine. So let's think that through for a moment. In the last examples, we used a specific account. So if we go through and set these parameters, so we'll set our host first to that machine, which was 192.168.1.70. That was our Active Directory machine. We'll then go through and set, as we did before, SMB domain to my Conesis Labs. And then we'll use the SMB account that we have, remember, which was called Loki. And then we'll set the password, which is a super secure password, passoutword1. Now, of course, let's stop for a second. First issue, as you can tell, is the super secure password. So our number one rule is to make sure that our passwords are not passoutword or password or any number of those top 25 passwords that everybody has. Now let me just clear this so I can run the exploit from here. Now, of course, we did set our payload and we chose it a Windows, and we'll do a Meterpreter, and we'll do a reverse TCP. So let me just show options just to make sure that we have everything set. Obviously, the only missing piece here is the L host, which is this machine that we're actually running on. Our L host will be this machine, remember? 172.16.1.38. So let's clear that again, and then we'll run the exploit. So the exploit goes ahead and it sends the stage, and then it connects and brings us back. Now notice in the example here, what it does is it first authenticates as that user Loki. It then creates the payload and uploads an executable, then runs the executable, deletes the executable, and then creates the session. So two key pieces that we need to resolve in order for that to not happen. The first piece is this, the authentication. And the second piece is the ability to run an executable. So let's flick to our Active Directory server. So here we are on the Active Directory server. Now, firstly, before we look at anything on the machine, the first place we need to look is within the firewall to make sure that our firewall services are running. And as you can see on the Active Directory, it's running on the guest, the private, and the domain. This should be rule number one. But actually, let's go a little bit deeper. Sometimes what happens is, in order to keep the firewall in place, we sometimes create rules to allow subnet traffic to go backwards and forwards. So for example, in my test environment here, I have a firewall rule that allows traffic to go backwards and forwards. If I actually look at the protocols, it's basically any protocol. And if I look at the scope, it's any of my subnets that I need to have access to. So in actual fact, just because the firewall's on doesn't save the day at this point because of this firewall rule. So rule number two, outside of all the standard stuff, is to go ahead and make sure there's no firewall rules that override and effectively make the firewall useful. Now, let's go back to that account in Active Directory. So let me have a quick look on here. Find Loki. Here's my account. Look at the properties for the account. So nothing particular is filled out. It's part of the domain. But if I look at member of, you'll see it's a domain user, but it's an administrator on this machine, or an administrator on any machine. So for example, this could be the SharePoint server that this account has been added as a local administrator. So in a SharePoint environment, for example, the farm account is added as a local administrator. If I'm able to figure out the password for the farm administrator, obviously I get access to the whole of SharePoint, but more importantly, I get a local administrator account. So if I was to remove this account from the administrators. So let me just do this now. So now my account is limited as a domain user. So this is about creating the least privilege account. I'm going to apply that and just close that. And then what we'll do, before we head back to test it, we can also go through and expand our group containers. So you'll see, for example, I have OUs that match to all my accounts. And what I can do is actually create group policies that would be associated to these to restrict the accounts from logging in. So if I go to Group Policy Editor, which is here, I've expanded my SharePoint accounts, right-clicked and said Create a GPO, and then I've clicked my GPO called SharePoint Security, and then I've actually added a GPO, which I'm in the process of doing. If we expand the policies, the Windows name, the security settings, and go to Local Policies, we can do User Right Assignment. From here, one of the first things I could do is deny logon locally. This would restrict my account from being able to do anything on that machine, and even if I was able to grab those permissions, I wouldn't actually be allowed to log in locally. Now, that doesn't fix it for the farm administrator account, because obviously that account does need that access. But any of the other accounts purely just need log on as a service and log on as a batch job or something else. They don't need log on locally, so we can actually deny their ability to log in. So let's close that down. And let's flick back to our Metasploit machine. Okay, so we're back here. Let me just exit that session and clear the screen and go back to Show Options. So what we have now is we have the same settings as before. We have our Cohesys lab account with the password word1. We have the same thing. Now let me just clear that and type exploit. Now notice instantly, my exploit goes across. It does authenticate initially as a user because it's a member of the domain, but then I instantly get a status of access denied. So that can be the easiest and simplest way of blocking the Active Directory one, outside of making sure the firewall's on, make sure you have antivirus running, or group policies that would restrict that. That simple move of permissions will block this process from running. Now, of course, I could go even further, and on the Windows machine, I could run something like AppLocker and control the executables that are actually allowed to run. In all fairness, if you do run antivirus on the machines, as soon as the payload tries to be uploaded, it will 99% of the time get captured unless we've done something special to change the signature of the executable. So that's the easiest way to protect yourself from the Active Directory exploit.